Hello, this is Nick Roach. I was shocked the other day to say I haven't posted a video since the end of May last year, 2019, and it's now February 2020, so I would apologise, but there's been a lot going on actually. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into that. The last two videos I did at the end of May last year were relating to the changes that I was going through at that time. I'd been learning about the different stages of enlightenment from a particular Eastern teaching, I guess, although it wasn't an Eastern teacher I was getting it from. So the words I'm now familiar with are from that particular teaching, but people might use different names. And the stages, they might input extra ones, but as is the way, I found a description of stages that actually fitted exactly what I had been through up till that point, and what I was going through at that time, and what I've been through since. I've also come across and met people who have jumped straight into one of the stages. So for them, and especially if they've only then stayed at that one stage, the other stages for them won't exist. They only know of one stage, and that's the step they took from where they were. So this is not a hard and fast rule, it's more as an example of what happens to help you understand what happens in what some refer to as spiritual enlightenment, self-realization, God-realization, waking up, being at one with everything, non-duality, these type of phrases. It's quite important actually, because if you are in groups online and forums, you will have highly knowledgeable people discussing and debating, and apparently using very different terms to describe it and arguing very convincingly. And one would wonder, how come they're saying opposite things? And understanding the stages will perhaps help everybody understand where these people most likely are, and where they are is genuine and correct in how they describe it. Okay. So, the little one, and I've got a nest of 5 Russian dolls in front of me. The little one we're going to of course use to represent what we're going to call the lower self, the lower emotional, personality, the identity of being a person. And in this is all simply to do with the sense of personal identity. This has nothing to do with one's emotional state and lack of emotional attachment to living and life, and also has nothing to do with their knowledge of how life works. This is purely in relation to the sense of personal identity, what I am. So in enlightenment it has different stages, but I'm specifically talking about the sense of identity, because one can be quite high up, let's say, to give it levels, on this process, stages, but still have or find living very difficult. Freedom from problems and worries could potentially happen at any point along this. or it may not happen till the end and beyond that. So the level of emotional attachment and one's knowledge of how the universe works are two other separate processes that people go through. So here we are, the first doll, the first stage, which is one's normal state of being. Here I am a person. I have likes and dislikes, opinions, beliefs, worries, regrets. I hate this, I like that. And that's where most people are. The lower personal self. Now, between here and here, there can be a great many insights, experiences, realizations, glimpses into the truth, and it can be quite incredible. They're often called awakenings. So someone can say, I've had an awakening, or I am awakened. And you might have 1,000 people all saying they are awakened, and it could actually mean anything at all. It means they've had a spiritual experience, or some even use the word just to say they didn't know about spiritual stuff, and now they've read something and it clicked and it really made sense, and they feel awake, more alive than they were before. So an awakening as a word doesn't necessarily mean a lot, because it can mean anything. It can mean a lot, depending on the one saying it. But in between the lower self and the first stage of enlightenment, there can be a great many insights and experiences and realizations, or there may not be any. As with anything, one can skip straight there without any prior knowledge at all. It might just happen. So the first stage. In the information I've been reading, and there'll be other names like I've said, the first stage was called self-realization. Because with a big S, self, that was lower self, this is the higher self. So here, the lower self realizes the higher self. The sense of identity starts to shift to the higher self. But it's not there yet. Here, the lower self still exists. It's still very influential. And so, I'm going to open it, it's quite important. From the perspective of the emotional, personal, separate self. Being emotional, there's a lot of experience there of itself. It looks into what it might come to know as the higher self, its true nature. What it is beyond the personal likes and dislikes and feelings and worries. And it sees that looking inside? There's nothing there. Because compared with it, the higher self, the vibration is much higher as an energetic. It's extremely fine, and from the dense, emotional, personal self, mind and emotions, it feels like nothing. It feels like absolutely nothing. So the first stage of enlightenment, called sometimes self-realization, I also read it's called cosmic consciousness sometimes, because one's realizing the higher self and going beyond the personal. But I prefer self-realization because the cosmic bit starts to create sense of stars and planets, and we're not at that stage yet. So self-realization. The lower self and the higher self are existing side by side, and from the sense of self-identity, personal identity, I, the emotional self, feel beyond what I am into the space of being, and the identity shifts onto that space and go, oh my God, I am nothing. There's nothing here. There's nobody here. This is nothing happening to nobody. There's literally, the experience is, there is absolutely nothing here. And you've probably heard teachers say this. And for most people listening to it from their personal, unhappy, struggling self, the idea of being nothing is quite incredible. And when these people say, I've got problems and I've got worries, the teacher at this stage says, that's because you're identifying with being here, when there's nothing here. There's absolutely nothing. So you've just got to see that there's nobody and nothing here, and then you'll stop. All the problems and worries will be irrelevant, because you'll know it's not happening to anyone, because no one to experience it. There's nothing. And of course, from the concept of non-duality, you might have heard this phrase, non-dual, not two, not one, not separate, everything's one. Realizing and becoming nothing, what could possibly be beyond nothing? If you realize nothing, it's logical, reasonable, to assume that that point of nothing is the point before anything exists. Because what could possibly be beyond nothing? Therefore, a lot of teachers, people who become enlightened, they start teaching from this stage, the first stage of enlightenment, of being absolutely nothing. And it is enlightenment. You've realized the higher self. And in this stage, it feels like nothing. The difficulty is if someone doesn't know about the other stages, they're likely to stay there forever, holding on to the experience of being nothing. Because that's everything, surely. That's all you can do. Okay. In my autobiography, in 2003, that was the stage I entered. But for those familiar with my teaching, I never described it as being nothing, because to me, I was perhaps one of the few who spent my entire life till then, through the teaching, practicing holding on to the stillness, which is a sense of I am, and I've been taught the stillness is me. I am the stillness. I am that which is behind the emotion, behind the mind, behind the thinking. I was taught, and I teach, that you can only be aware of what you are not. So if you can see thoughts and feel feelings, then you can't be that. You must be the bit that's watching them. So I was taught from the very beginning, as an unhappy 18-year-old, that I was the space behind it all anyway. So the idea of being nothing never happened here, because I was always that which was watching. But traditionally, the lower self looks into the higher self. Oh my God, I'm nothing. There's nobody here and nothing here. Okay. So what happens after that then? Well, from what we've described, you can see eventually the little lower self gives up, surrenders, or the identity shifts from the lower self to just the higher self. And in merging with the energy of the higher self, it no longer feels like nothing, because the lower self has given up, the emotional self has given up, or the identity has shifted from it. I now no longer identify with the unhappy bit, the emotional likes and dislikes, opinions, beliefs, little fly there, excuse me. I've been identifying with the stillness of the higher self, and I've merged with that now entirely. I've merged with the higher self. The energy of it is now my energy. And this, in what I was reading, was referred to as unity consciousness. partly because one could say the higher self and the lower self have now merged, or the lower self has given up, or the identity has moved away from the lower self. Either way, there's only now one self. But also because of the experience of it, because the energy of the higher self is the same energy that's creating the entire physical universe. Everything and anything that ever happens, will ever happen, can ever happen, is the energy of the higher self. So in this state, and you've probably heard people describing this experience, and I had it myself, one looks out onto the physical environment and experiences everything is me. This is all me. This is all myself. I am this, I'm that, I'm that, I'm that, I'm that. This is all me. I am all that exists. I am everything. Nothing exists without my being here. I'm responsible for anything and everything that ever happened, and ever can happen, and ever will happen, because I am everything. I am the entire universe. I am all that exists. Nothing exists without me being here. I am everything. I am the universe. Which is very different, of course, from being nothing and nobody here. It's completely the opposite. I'm the entire universe. And here one could say everything is self. You've heard that said. Here one might say there is no self, because experiences of being nothing and nobody. There is no self, there's nothing. The experience is nothing. But here it's, I'm everything. There's definitely a self, because I am all that exists. There's me and I am it. I am this. So again, from the perspective or the concept of non-duality, not dual, not two, just one, being everything, being the entire universe, one could say that I thought that was it, but that wasn't it. There was me, and there was the space I was looking into, feeling that was me. That was duality, but now there's non-duality. Because I am what I was looking at. The perceiver and the perceived become one and the same. Hence the term unity consciousness. I am what I'm looking at. I am everything. And again, it's very common for teachers, people to get to here. Not as many do as get to here, but for people here to think, well, I'm finished. What could possibly be beyond everything? Or what could? What could be beyond being the whole universe? And of course, the experience of the universe is not, I'm some star up there, because that doesn't occur. The universe is what's experienced in this moment here and now, which are just the images and the colours on the screen or the field of consciousness, which I see and experience as being me. Anything else is imagination. So when I say I'm the universe, I am that. That is experienced at this moment. Now, this state unity can have a lot of levels and stages in it, different experiences, different depths. And I've spoken about some of those, and I'll speak more at a later date. And I even understand some say prior to the next stage I'm going to talk about, there is a definite point at which people might stop. Having realised I'm everything, this is all oneself, there can be a love for everything, an intense love. One might feel the love earlier on, but from this stage has its own love for the whole universe. Love for everything. And again, people might stay there. Sometimes it's an abstract love of all things. Sometimes it's of a particular person, God, spiritual figure, whatever it is. There's a holding on to the world. Holding on to oneself, the sense of love for everything. So, what could be beyond unity? And again, I use the term because that's what I was told, but some people refer to unity at the very end as well. They use the name there. So the names aren't so important, but they're what I'm familiar with now. So, beyond being everything is this. Now we're getting into Eastern terms, sadly, a little bit, because I don't tend to use Eastern terms, but it's what I've now become familiar with. So after unity is what's called Brahman consciousness. So in the Eastern traditions, that's God. So above unity is Brahman consciousness. And what happens here? Well, it's where the sense of identity, which is currently in unity for the whole world, for the higher self, I am the higher self, I am the universe, moves away from that and becomes beyond the world, beyond the universe. And I become that in which the universe arises. I become that in which the universe exists and manifests. I am not the universe here. I am not the higher self. I'm beyond the higher self. I, as in the centre of identity. So all it is, just sense of identity shifting. I'm that, I'm that, I'm that, I'm that, I'm that. So it hasn't, nothing's changed, except the sense of identity has moved from the higher self in unity consciousness to beyond the higher self in Brahman consciousness. Now here, because one is at the point beyond the universe, one is at the point beyond anything existing. And this leads teachers, people, to describe it as nothing ever happens, nothing has ever happened, nothing will or can ever happen, nothing happens. Because I'm beyond the universe. So in this state, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Now, of course, the words can sound very very similar to the self-realization. This is nothing happening to no one. And this is where people can get caught. They can sound similar. And they might even be the same words. But the experience is very different. This is not of being nothing. Because that was an emptiness, like a void, a vacuum of nothingness. This is not nothing. This is the point beyond anything. This is no thing, but it's not nothing. It's not an emptiness, a vacuum, a void. Because energetically, there's not an absence of energy. It's an absence of substance, of an object. Here, the object was the world, and I was it. I've gone beyond the objective world. So I'm not nothing, I am no thing. I'm beyond the whole lot, beyond everything. And again, it's quite common again to stop here as one continues through the stages, because what could possibly be beyond being beyond the world? Well, what could? I'm beyond the higher self, which is the universe, and certainly beyond the lower self, which is the personality connected to the universe. I'm beyond it all. Well, fascinatingly, there is this other big stage, and it's only actually a small shift, but very, very important. Because at each one of these, excuse me, knocked over a little chappy here, each one of these, I'm that as a lower self, but I'm not nothing, and I'm not the universe, and I'm not beyond the universe. I'm a person. And then I'm not a person, and I'm not everything, and I'm not beyond everything. I'm not beyond the universe. There is no universe here. There's nothing happening to no one. I'm nothing. And then here, I'm not a little person. I'm not nothing. I'm everything. I'm not beyond the universe. I am everything. And this one, in Brahman consciousness, I'm not a person. I'm not nothing. I'm not everything. I'm beyond it all. I'm the essence before anything exists. And you can see, I was trying to make the point as I was describing it, each one is dismissing the last. Not that, this. Not that, this. Not that, this. All the way through. So the last stage that I'm familiar with is called Para-Brahman, which is beyond Brahman. And it's almost an unfortunate term because it is beyond Brahman when you look at the stages like this. But the experience of it is not beyond Brahman, quite the opposite. I will add, by the way, that in this Brahman consciousness, it's sometimes said one loses their enlightenment, because from becoming nothing, and the experience was I was definitely nothing, and being the universe, I was definitely enlightened, I was everything. In Brahman consciousness, nothing ever happens. I'm not enlightened because I'm beyond even the idea of enlightenment here. How can there be enlightenment when one is beyond the physical universe? So, anyway, back to the experience of Para-Brahman. I said it's not, I don't like the power beyond Brahman, as I was saying, because it's, although put them in a line, it is the next one beyond it. In truth, it's not beyond it really, quite the opposite. Because what happens in Para-Brahman consciousness excuse me, little chappy. All the levels are accepted into one experience. There's no, I'm this, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. That doesn't occur. Everything that happens is here. It is said that Para-Brahman includes all the different levels of enlightenment, because nothing is excluded. One accepts that the experience here is of being a person with likes and dislikes, opinions, beliefs, no problem. One accepts that the one experience is of being everything, no problem. One accepts that I'm actually beyond everything as well, because nothing's really happening, no problem. And the experience is therefore of neither being everything or of being nothing. It's neither being something or no thing. Everything is included, accepted, a part of this experience of being. so. And it's very easy when people talk about the different stages of enlightenment for one to get the perspective that that means you're going deeper and deeper into the different levels of consciousness or something. Like falling down a hole, going deeper and deeper and deeper, and you are falling all the time. So it's easy to think when one talks about the stages of enlightenment that they are separate things. They are separate. And what I like about this demonstration with the dolls, if I may show you, what one has is the pure point of consciousness, the pure point that you are, that's within, or looking out of your eyes, let's say, the pure point of consciousness. That's always. But here, in these 5 things, we only really have one thing. And it's not that one. The higher self. The physical world. Because once the point of consciousness comes into the physical world, which is its higher self, immediately, let's say, being in a world of objects in one particular position, it becomes identified with being that position, this object. This object is me. I am this object within the physical world. So the world, the environment, creates the experience of being a person. And having got the experience of being a person, as it comes back, it begins to experience not being a person anymore. And having got the physical world, we then have not the physical world. We have not the physical environment, not the higher self. And when we've got the physical world and not the physical world, we then have the whole lot together, out of which they all came. But it all starts and finishes actually with the physical environment, which is the higher self. It all revolves around the higher self. From the higher self, I become a person. From the higher self, I become beyond the universe. But once I've got those two, I can step beyond the universe and beyond the universe to realise it's all the same thing. It's all what was always here. The being. And this one, here people refer to the experience as there's just this. There's only this. There's only what is. There's only what's occurring. There was, because it includes everything. When one is here, there's no distinction. There's no I'm this and not that, I'm this and not that, I'm not that, I'm this. That doesn't happen. There's all one experience. Of just being. And I use the term being, and some people will immediately put an experience on the experience of being. Oh, that means you're being that. No, 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 no. It's complete. And it's not, as I experience it, hasn't got any positivity in it. No negativity. It's just being the energetic presence which is always here, and anything that occurs and arises does so as this energetic presence, which is beyond everything and yet within everything at the same time. And yet the things are only on the surface as images and colours. One's sense of identity is, I'll say, beyond it all, and yet there's no separation. There's no, like in the Brahman, I'm beyond it all. That doesn't occur. It's all a melding, merging, simple being. And here I'll say it does again seem like non-duality. Now I've heard it said there are other levels that one can get to after one dies. God, I wouldn't know about those. But from the sense of personal identity, enlightenment, these are the stages as I've had them described to me and I have experienced them. At the end of the autobiography, I was into the unity consciousness. I think I called it no self, and then switched to liberation because life became a pleasure then. But I didn't know about the term unity. And I certainly didn't know then about these other stages. But so much has happened in between these two. Lots of little experiences, each one quite incredible, before it went beyond the experience. That happened at the end of last May, like I've said. I was 2 weeks into it when I did the last video. And this has been, I don't know. It's been merging into it for the last month. They're still quite new. But I thought it was time anyway to try and put this simply. Whether or not it'll occur to make it even simpler still in the next months or years, I don't know, but I'm hoping that makes sense for everyone. And thank you very much. Being some way from the camera, I've got to get up to turn it off now. Thank you.